News outlets around the world are abuzz about what they call racist tweets and promises of raids. But is the US president just trying to distract from a White House in crisis? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Donald Trump's attacks against immigrants and minorities. Ana Nunez lives in Houston, Texas. She told reporters on Sunday that not a brown face could be seen in her neighborhood. Latinos were hiding in their homes, scared after Donald Trump threatened nationwide raids against undocumented immigrants. But the arrests never happened. If Trump was just trying to terrorize vulnerable people, it seemed to work. Then the president turned his tweets against 4 women with a very public platform. As you've heard by now, he told a group of congresswomen, all minorities, all American citizens, to go back to where they came from. While the media is calling the comments unbefitting of a US president, it might be the kind of behavior that keeps Trump in the White House for 4 more years. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi reports.
The tweets that launch 1,000 column inches. The latest were typical Donald Trump. He uses social media to throw red meat to the base and anger opponents. This time, it's what many called racist tweets directed at 4 Democratic congresswomen, known as the Squad. Donald Trump wrote that it was interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally come from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came?
And beyond.
The 4 first-term congresswomen come from diverse backgrounds, but 3 were born in the US and all are American citizens. Perhaps the most prominent, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was clear about what she thought of Trump's words.
He relies on racism, division, and anti-immigrant sentiment to consolidate power because he does not have a positive vision for the future of America.
But faced with a barrage of criticism, Trump did what he normally does, doubled down.
As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. And that's what I say all the time. That's what I said in a tweet, which I guess some people think is controversial. A lot of people love it, by the way.
Trump's tweets came as he said the Immigration Enforcement Agency, ICE, was planning mass raids against undocumented migrants in at least 10 major cities. But there's confusion over what exactly is happening. Trump insists that the raids have started, but immigrant advocates have reported that they haven't seen much evidence. But that doesn't matter much for people living their lives under the constant fear of deportation.
For us as the children of migrants, we're scared to hear a knock on the door because we think that it can be ICE and that it can take our parents.
This is a migrant detention center in Texas. While many of the people being held here were captured crossing the border, the image has added to a sense of fear, and not only for immigrants. Especially when the president tweets that US-born congresswomen should go home. But does Trump have another motivation? The Squad is known for its progressive, left-leaning politics. Politics that don't seem to be popular among some of their more established Democratic colleagues. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi defended the Squad after Trump's tweets. But just over a week ago, Pelosi downplayed their influence to the press, and things have been testy recently. Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar are symbols of a younger, more left-wing side of the Democratic Party. More established Democrats, like Pelosi, seem worried they'll scare off more moderate voters ahead of the 2020 elections. But Trump seems determined to keep them as regular features of his Twitter feed, to increase their profile and further divide Democrats before next year's polls. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in Minneapolis, Minnesota, is a former White House chief ethics lawyer, Richard Painter, who worked in the George W. Bush administration. Good to have you on the program, sir. Your immediate thoughts on Trump's comments about the 4 congresswomen?
Well, this started as a spat among the Democrats in the United States House of Representatives, the 4 Congresswomen and some others strongly disagreeing with Speaker Nancy Pelosi on a number of issues. But even though inappropriate comments were made on both sides there, what we've seen is Donald Trump jump into this and make racist comments about the 4 Congresswomen and suggesting that they should leave our country. They are all 4 American citizens. And for someone in the presidency to suggest that his political opponents should leave the country is a very dangerous thing. And the racial overtones are also dangerous. This is something we should not tolerate in the United States.
So as somebody who is a lawyer who was within the ethics committee within the White House, is this something that the president is willing to take the risk for? i.e., he's willing to be unethical, willing to be racist, if the end game is he can unsettle the Democrats and maybe help himself stay in the White House for 4 more years?
This is the standard playbook of a dictator. This is not the playbook of the president of the United States or the leader of any other democratic country. The House of Representatives needs to immediately start an impeachment inquiry, have hearings, and vote out articles of impeachment so there can be a trial in the Senate. They're not doing their job in the House of Representatives. They're not impeaching him, and that's why he's doing this. He's ignoring their subpoenas. Even though he's obligated to comply with the subpoenas. He is attacking the free press with rhetoric we haven't seen since Hitler talked about the press in Germany. And now he's talking about his political opponents the way dictators do. We should not tolerate this in the United States.
I'm curious about the difference between rhetoric and actions. And again, I'm going to delve into your former role working within the Bush administration. Can't we look at it and say, well, you know, Trump just says mean stuff? If we look at George W. Bush, isn't, I don't know, killing tens of thousands of Iraqis arguably more racist, more unethical, and more impeachable than saying mean racist things and killing nobody?
You know, going back over whether it's the Vietnam War under Lyndon Johnson or the Iraq War under George W. Bush and Tony Blair, that's what Trump does. He always points to somebody else. He could point to the Bushes. He could point to Obama. He could point to someone else and say, look at them. Look at Hillary Clinton. Instead of focusing on his own conduct, we need to deal
He's not
with
doing it. I'm doing it. I'm doing
now.
it. But I'm doing it, Mr. Painter. I'm doing it. I'm saying, well,
I don't think that
these
helps.
are words and those were actions.
For example, he says, look at what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did, putting the Japanese in the internment camps during World War II. This is no worse than that. I mean, we've heard these arguments, and these arguments are very destructive. We need to face the here and now, and what this president is doing. This president is threatening his political opponents with jail. We have never seen that before. And if we don't learn from history that words very soon are translated into actions, we're going to be in very big trouble in the United States. This is the way Hitler talked when he was a candidate for president of Germany in 1932 and then in the parliamentary elections. We need to see the warning signs, and we need to take action now.
And you think that he can be impeached?
I believe the House of Representatives certainly could impeach him. And there will be a trial in the Senate. And the evidence will be clear that he has not only spoken these words, but he has committed criminal acts. He has obstructed justice in the investigation of the Russia interference in our election. The entire second half of the Mueller report makes it clear he obstructed justice. The first half of the Mueller report, much of it redacted, needs to be disclosed to the public so we see what the contacts were with the Russians, whether or not those contacts were a criminal conspiracy. We cannot have a president who is in bed with the Russians. We can't have that in the United States. There needs to be a trial in the United States Senate. And if the Senate has a sham trial, they choose to acquit him, we can vote them out as well as vote him out in 2020. But we need to proceed with this.
Richard Painter, great to have you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, joining me now in La Jolla, California, is former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman. who's now the creator and executive producer of the podcast Talking Feds. In Washington, D.C. is Ivan Garcia Hidalgo. He's a Republican strategist and the president of the Hispanic Leadership Council. Good to have you both on the program, gentlemen. Ivan, why is the president saying such racist stuff?
I don't think anything he said is racist. I think he's been right on the money with the description of these four radicals that we have in Congress.
Go back to where you came from. How is that not
I think
racist?
he should have not even gotten involved. Well, what's racist about it?
Okay, if I told you to go back to where you came from, Ivan, go back to where you came from. Ivan, go back to where you came from. You don't take offense?
Well, you have to understand, read, and listen to the entire context, right? He's saying go back to where you came from and see exactly what's going over there. Those countries are corrupt. Those countries are a disaster. They're an embarrassment to society, and that's the exact same policy that they want to bring to America.
So you're bringing up the context.
So I think it's a fair.
Okay, Ivan, you're bringing up the context.
Fair.
Okay. They're criticizing him. He's saying, hold on.
But you have to use a context.
Okay, great. So I'm saying, let's take the context. He's saying you cannot criticize, and if you want to criticize, you should go back to where you came from. He criticized Obama for 8 years, so should Trump go back to Germany because he didn't like America at that time?
Well, I think that's a different. Altogether, it's completely different. What do you mean? These people are radical socialists, borderline communists, and Trump is definitely not a communist. There is no room in America for communists or for socialism. That's just the way it is. That is an absolute fact. What he is addressing right now, or what he addressed the other day through the tweets, was exactly that. The problem here is that the media and everybody hates Trump. They're blinded and they have this mental derangement that anything that Trump says is racist.
Okay.
But when Speaker Pelosi was attacking these same people,
she didn't tell them to go back to where they came from.
Pelosi was attacking these same people, nobody had a problem.
Okay, this is interesting.
AOC did call the speaker, but AOC called the speaker a racist. And that's what liberals do. That's what these radical
let me take that.
do.
Okay, this is
when
interesting.
They don't have an argument, when they're losing on the issues.
I want to ask
but
Harry.
when they're losing on the issues, they yell and scream racism.
Okay, I want to bring Harry in here because an interesting point that was made up here is Speaker Pelosi versus these young women in Congress. Harry, it was mentioned by Richard Painter as well. It seems as if you had this spat within the Democratic Party, the older guard and the newer guard, the progressive wing versus Pelosi's wing. You have this spat and Trump sees it going on and he smells blood. So has that been the genesis of this? He smelled blood and he's doing this to divide the Democrats and it's working, presumably, Harry.
I think it's an arguable account of the genesis, or it might just be Trump's, nativist instincts. I think I just heard Ivan say there's no room in America for socialists. Of course, these four duly elected representatives are not socialists, but you know what? Of course there's room in America for socialists. There's room in America for people of all political stripes. That's the promise of America. There's no sense debating whether this was xenophobic or racist. Of course it was. And it sounds like the crazy ramblings of a guy on the back of the bus. This is supposed to be the moral leader of the country and the free world. And it's stunning to consider that this is the kind of stuff he is shopping. Is he doing it to divide the base, or because it works with certain people, or to put Pelosi on the defensive? That's a secondary or even tertiary question. He's doing it. The President of the United States is making, as president, he's using his bully pulpit to actually tell American-born citizens they should go back to where they came from. It is stunning, repugnant, and actually only as of this morning, finally, some members of his own party are beginning to recognize it. But this is our president. And it's a repugnant state of affairs that this is who represents us morally to one another and to the free world.
Ivan?
Look, again, Harry's a liberal. He loves that wing. What's amazing here, Harry, is that in the past, Nancy Pelosi was considered a radical, a liberal, and now she is the voice of reason within your party. So think about that. Think how radicalized the Democratic Party has become. You say there is room for socialism and communism in the U.S. Of course, the First Amendment allows that, right? But we as Americans and the framers of this country did not believe in that, right? And the ideology,
wrong.
Just the ideology is destructive. It leads to corruption. It leads to, what do you mean, why? Look at history. Do you need a history lesson? I mean, I'm not here to give you a history lesson.
Okay, but Ivan,
if you're asking me why socialism
Ivan,
and why
history
communism is destructive, I don't know what we're having a conversation.
Ivan, history does tell us as well that leaders who tend to tell minorities to go back to where they came from, that doesn't end well as well. Right, Ivan?
World War I. Yeah. If I can make a very quick point, I think there's a major difference between how radical or Ivan, just a quick point, please, in response. There's just a major difference between how radical or what political stripe we think Pelosi. Thank you. We see I think there's a very major important difference between how radical or not Nancy Pelosi is and the sort of outright rank demagoguery that Trump is propounding. It's a very separate issue when the president says to duly elected representatives, go back to where you came from. It's just not responsive to say, oh, well, the Democratic Party has gotten more left than it even has.
Okay, so Ivan, I want to give you a bit of a timeline.
Well, they have,
here.
Harry. You know that, Harry. You know they've been radicalized.
Okay, Ivan, I want to give you a bit of a timeline. Okay, so Ivan, Trump does have a long list of racist comments during his tenure. This is a fact, right? He pushed the birther conspiracy, suggesting President Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. He called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the U.S. When Trump was campaigning in 2016, he said Mexicans are rapists. And as president, he said there were very fine people on both sides when he spoke about white supremacists, while disparaging Haiti and some African countries with a word I can't say on television, but he called them specific types of countries. It started with SH, right? So, Ivan, when we look at this, when we look back to birtherism, I mean, birtherism was maybe a dog whistle. This is throwing raw, juicy meat at the dog now. It's not even a dog whistle anymore. Come on, you have to accept that, Ivan.
Well, no, but absolutely, I will not accept that. I don't think anything that you've mentioned was racist at all. I think there was a legitimate concern about Obama's birthplace that started with Hillary Clinton. It wasn't something that Trump did. Trump picked it up and he had fun with it. He had fun, and he made Obama pull out his entire birth certificate, something that he didn't want to do. So that was a win for the president. He wanted to have him open up his college records because there's a lot of speculation about him claiming a certain ethnicity or a certain religion.
Ivan, when I spend time with KKK, actual KKK in Arkansas, KKK members, one of the reasons why they considered their president at that time, Barack Obama, illegitimate and worthy of death was because they believed he wasn't born in America and he was born in Africa, right? So this isn't just a game where the president goes, I made Obama sweat a little bit.
But who started that, right?
Okay, it's Hillary Clinton. Blame the Democrats.
That was started by the Hillary Clinton campaign. That's factually accurate.
Okay, Trump's innocent
of everything.
What do
you mean not blame him? That's factually accurate. That is factually accurate. That's factually accurate. I think the problem here is that you guys here on the left, on the media,
I'm not on the left,
anything that Trump says is automatically racist. Anything that this president says is racist, and you can't do that.
Strategic mindset. Ivan, let me jump into the mindset a little bit.
You have to look at.
Let me jump into the mindset a bit.
Go ahead.
Let me jump into the mindset a bit.
Okay.
You're a Republican strategist. All this stuff that he's saying seems to have worked. It got him elected in 2016. Is it a legitimate plan now to say this stuff about AOC, about Ilhan Omar, and so on, tactically, to say this stuff, to say racist stuff about them, go back to the countries that you came from, even though they were born in the United States, in order to get him reelected? Is that a fair plan?
Well, look, putting everything aside and bringing objectivity, like you're saying, absolutely. I think it's a great strategy. You look at their approval numbers; they're in the single digits. They are not liked by anybody in this country except a few very radicalized people. So absolutely, I think it's a great strategy what the president's doing, is making these four radicals the face of the Democratic Party, and I think the American people are going to reject that come 2020. Absolutely. I think it was a tactical mistake to get involved right now because there is that infighting between AOC and that squad with the leadership in the House, with the Democrats. They were killing each other. There was a Democratic civil war, and we and the president should have let them go at it and tear each other up.
Okay.
I think it was a
Harry
mistake to
Litman.
get involved now.
Harry
But,
Litman, this is going to make him win.
At the same time, I think, making them the face.
Okay, so Harry,
Go ahead.
he's doing this and it's going to make him win. How do you feel about that?
Look, I don't see this primarily as a matter of tactics and strategy. The President of the United States, like the very first Republican, is supposed to promote the better angels of our nature. Trump is self-consciously promoting the worst devils of our nature. If it works, it's no justification. That's been perhaps it has worked throughout history. Perhaps that's part of what animates the base. If that's what he's doing, maybe even more shame on him than if he's expressing his true views. Might it work? I could see it either way. I have more faith in the American people, but I'm no expert at that. What I do know is hearing this garbage from the President of the United States is a sad day for all Americans.
Okay, and Ivan, at the same time, I want to talk about other policies beyond words. So we had the impending ICE raids. They didn't happen, but they created a lot of anxiety. We have the debate over what's happening on the border, the conditions of the camps. Pence was there, Lindsey Graham was there. Should we be looking at all of this as one broader package that says that America first, and if you happen to be a minority, this place is not necessarily for you?
Well, I don't think that's accurate at all. This country is one of the most welcoming countries in the history of the planet. We allow millions of people every single year to come here, but in a legal and orderly fashion. I think the situation at the border is unfortunate. Customs Border Patrol, ICE, are law enforcement agencies. They're not nursery school or elementary school or some type of daycare facility to go take care of children. It's a situation that could be easily remedied and fixed by the Congress. It has to be addressed by both parties. It can't be the situation where it's let's do anything to try and harm Trump. Everything is anti-Trump. If we really want to do something and fix the problem, it has to be bipartisan in nature. The Democrats have to step up, come to the table, and negotiate and have real conversations. There's issues with TPS, with DACA. I think a lingering conversation about an overall comprehensive immigration reform that needs to happen in some capacity. Those are big questions and big issues that right now are being, played in a very partisan manner. I think the Hispanic community is being utilized by the Democratic Party with a lot of demagoguery, but zero action. And I think it's a shame. I think the Republican Party has really allowed the situation to continue because they haven't brought any serious propositions or bills to the table to correct this as well. So when we look at the situation, yeah, you know what? This started under President Obama. He built the cages. He separated families. This administration has continued it. I think it's about time that we fix the problem. But in order to do that, we need to secure the border. We need to change the rules and the laws, especially the asylum laws that the administration is proposing.
Okay.
And we can't have hundreds of thousands and millions of people invading our country through the southern border. That needs to be controlled.
Trump said conditions at the detention center had, quote, great reviews, almost as if he was talking about a hotel on TripAdvisor. Harry Litman, with all of that in mind, given that Trump is saying this about serving congresswomen who have a background in, countries that are further away and countries that he might have preconceived notions about. At the same time, Republicans are saying, Democrats, you've got to work with us on issues like immigration. Are we going to reach a point where the Democrats say we can't work with this president at all on these things?
Well, I mean, it could be, and that is actually the origin of the political spat between the four Democrats and Pelosi, the 4 Democrats thinking they gave too much. Again, look, there is a political side of this where I think the evidence is pretty strong that Trump has been high-handed, insisting on certain goals, especially the wall, that really don't do very much but fit his kind of rhetorical stance and appeal to the people. But then again, there's the moral issue. He treats non-Americans as subhuman, and we have a dehumanizing policy that does separate families, that is way beyond anything that happened with Obama, and that hurts us with the rest of the world. That I think is not just a moral issue, but a practical one. Will the Democrats come to the table? I think they have somewhat already, and it's just a matter of trying to give, the sort of mad king something of what he wants in order to get some sensible immigration reform. It's tough stuff. It's been like this for decades, frankly. The immigration system is broken. I don't disagree with that. But I also think it's problematic to stoke the fires of Trump's nativist impulses here.
Harry, I want to ask you maybe a bit of a legal question here, and a tactical question from a legal perspective, as someone who was in that Attorney General's office, right? So we heard Richard Painter earlier on saying we need to impeach him. Yes, we can pass it through the House, but it seems unlikely. I'm no lawyer and I'm no US politician. It goes to the Senate, it's not going to happen, right? So would the Democrats be making a major mistake? I'm not going to ask you whether you think his actions are impeachable or not. I'm going to ask you, will it be a waste of time, even if they believe it to the ends of the earth? Is it a waste of time trying to impeach President Trump?
Waste of time is the least of it. And yes, it goes without saying his actions have been more impeachable than those of any president in history. There is this now political calculus of not waste of time, but backfiring. Would Trump be able to make a sort of Brer Rabbit strategy of stoking the base in order to be reelected? I think it's quite possible. I understand why Pelosi is worried about it, but I just point out we've got a problem with our Constitution, that here we are in the sort of emergency break glass moment, and everyone seems paralyzed. I've thought about why this is so. It's beyond the scope of this program, but I understand why they're skittish about it politically, even though the sort of moral or broader kind of political case for it is strong.
Ivan, very finally, if the Democrats do try to impeach, would this be a gift to Donald Trump?
Look, I think the Democrats would be crazy to go to impeachment. Nancy Pelosi's a very, very tenured, very, very smart politician. She knows, she's been around for a long time. She knows it's not going to get any traction. It might not even pass the House, controlled by the Democrats, and obviously it would fail in the Senate. The problem right now is the economy is doing so great. The country is doing so great. Unemployment at historic numbers for women, for minorities, blacks, Hispanics, everybody is. This is possibly one of the best economies in the history of this nation. So the Democrats really don't have an argument. Their argument and their propositions are socialism. They're screaming in the streets for socialism, and in Venezuela, people are screaming in the streets for water, food, and toilet paper. That's the oxymoron here. It's amazing. Democrats want chaos, destruction, misery, and corruption, and they can't take advantage and they can't celebrate that the country is doing so great. Probably one of the greatest economies ever. Okay. And they can't sit there and say, hey, you know what? Things are great. How do we improve on this? How do we extend this to everybody else? No, they don't think that way. They want to tear it down.
Okay, but what the president's been saying. Okay,
that's why that ideology is extremely dangerous.
I know, but it also does sound like ideology if you say that things are so great, and if you refuse to accept that they're great, then you should go back to where you came from. I'm out of time, Ivan, but you're cordially invited to come back on the Newsmakers. Harry, you as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Caracas was a tale of two cities this week, with rival protests kicking off Venezuela's independence celebrations. In the east, opposition leader Juan Guaido joined marchers who chanted "No more torture" after a new UN report that condemned Nicolas Maduro's administration. He's being accused of thousands of extrajudicial killings and the detention of his political opponents. Meanwhile, across town, Maduro presided over a colorful military parade, with his supporters calling for his Bolivarian revolution to continue. So with the country literally split, it has us asking who's the legitimate leader. That debate after this report by Adam Pletz.
Some Venezuelans loyal to President Nicolas Maduro are outraged. That's after the UN accused his government of human rights abuses.
Our report makes clear essential institutions and the rule of law in Venezuela have been profoundly eroded. Excessive and lethal force have been used against protesters, as well as during security operations by special forces. Torture is also a problem.
The UN reports Venezuelan security forces carried out more than 6,800 extrajudicial killings in the last 18 months. Other abuses include sexual violence and arbitrary detention, it says. But Maduro's supporters say they aren't convinced, and some see the report as an outside attempt to undermine their government.
We are peaceful. We don't want foreign intervention. We've taken a gamble on dialogue. Michelle Bachelet, correct the report and do what you need to do. You look like a puppet of the American empire.
Negotiations between Maduro's government and opposition leader Juan Guaido are set to resume. They're being mediated by Norway and hosted by Barbados, and many hope they'll agree on new elections. At a military parade marking Venezuelan Independence Day, Maduro said he supports the talks.
Sigo insistiendo en el establecimiento de una mesa permanente de diálogo por la paz. Y lo vamos a lograr con la buena de Dios Padre Todopoderoso, con sus bendiciones, con la buena voluntad, con la capacidad política de negociación.
But some critics have said the president's words are little more than lip service. Guaido has agreed to send a delegation to the talks, but with plenty of international support, his message is still one of defiance against Maduro.
La ONU lo dijo claramente, bien especificado. Venezuela hoy vive una dictadura, pero que lo vea el mundo también. No nos hemos rendido ni nos vamos a rendir ante ninguna dictadura. Vamos a seguir en la calle.
But can the talks succeed? Or does Guaido think his chances on the street are better than his options at the negotiating table? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Geneva, we have the first UN rapporteur to visit Venezuela since the 1990s, Alfred de Zayas. And in Washington, D.C. is Jose Aristimuño, who was the Deputy National Press Secretary for the Democratic Party and is lobbying for Juan Guaido in the United States. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program. Alfred, let's start with you. This UN Human Rights Report. Gross violations of human rights, they say, under Maduro. More than 5,200 killings in 2018, and many of them covered up by Maduro's government. Political detentions, not a good look for Maduro's government. Is it, Alfred? Do you accept the findings of the report?
The government has sent a 11-page refutation of the report, including concerning the allegations of extrajudicial killings. Certainly, there are homicides. The main thing is, are they being investigated? When I was in Venezuela in November, December 2017, I spent quite a bit of time with the fiscal, with the prosecutor, and with the defensor del pueblo, the ombudsman, and that was one of the questions that I all had. You know, to what extent is impunity tolerated? And I was given abundant information as to investigations that were ongoing and to a considerable number of convictions that had been handed down in the year 2017. Now, for 2018, I think, according to the report, only 5 convictions were handed down. but there are many investigations ongoing. So that is the issue.
So you trust them, Alfred? Certainly. Do you trust them to investigate themselves and to hold to account those that committed crimes?
I am very much in favor of independent investigations. That is something that I have recommended with regard to many countries, including Iran. I think that independent investigations are necessary, but also in Honduras, also in Colombia, also in Brazil. I mean, Colombia has the record of killing of social leaders.
Sure, but
and
okay, yeah, but let's keep this focused. Certainly, let's keep this focused on the situation in Venezuela. Jose, the report came out. The government pushed back in what Alfred calls a refutation. I've read a lot of what the government has said. The government says this is not fair. These are false statements. They're distortions. This lacks balance. This is harmful to the dignity of the Venezuelan people. Do they have a point, Jose?
They certainly don't. I think the international community in over 50 countries of the world, including the body of the UN, understand clearly that what the Maduro illegitimate government now has done for many years, it's simply absurd. It's a dictatorship. It's an authoritarian government that simply sees no rule of law. So I don't see a point, to all due respect with Alfred, I don't see a point of any sort of independent investigation. And if it were an independent investigation, I don't think the Maduro regime will allow it. I mean, we know this with the elections. You know, anytime we try to get real international witnesses to go into the country, it's always been an issue. I think the Venezuelan people understand, and the international community, they don't need the UN report to understand that what's happening in Venezuela has been grave and has been dangerous for many, many, many years. It's certainly a reaffirmation of what we have been saying for what the opposition has been saying for years. What the Maduro regime is doing it's horrible. It is countless killings time after time. If you don't agree with them, if you say something against them, if you protest against them, I mean, you got to remember the killings of the students, many young people, till, you know, as recent as a couple of weeks, with the gentleman who was protesting because he had no electricity or gas in his house, and they shot him in the eye, and he's now blind. So it is absurd.
Okay, so there are multiple instances, credible reports of individuals who have been killed. One of the things that Guaido said in the aftermath of the report, he came out and he said, well, the report is a clear example of Maduro's government being a regime and being a dictatorship. But the report doesn't say that. So is Guaido now milking it as well in trying to politicize it? Because the report was very specific about terrible things that might have happened on the ground. They don't delve into whether this is a dictatorship or not. Was Guaido wrong to say that?
Well, look, I think there's no question that Michelle Bachelet and the UN have been very diplomatic, right? Till this very day, they pretty much recognize the Maduro regime. So I think there's no question that the UN has been moving in the right direction, but maybe not as fast as we like it to be. I don't think President Guaido is wrong. I don't think he's milking this, as you've said. I think President Guaido it's doing the right thing. Again, the UN is just a reaffirmation of everything that we've seen from the very beginning.
Alfred Desires, one of the points that the government makes is that the people that were interviewed for this report, more than 558, were outside the borders of the country. Now, isn't that low from Maduro's government? Because not only was the situation intolerable enough for these people, they couldn't handle it. They fled across the border to countries such as Colombia or Brazil. But afterwards, when they give the United Nations their testimony, Maduro's government says, well, these people cannot be balanced because clearly they're not in the country, they fled.
Well, the problem with the report is that it is methodologically improper.
How?
The report concentrates on the statements presented by the opposition. When I was there, I interviewed victims of the guarimbas, and there were many. There were 7 who were burnt alive. I interviewed one person who was burnt during the guarimbas, who was thrown off his motorcycle, etc., etc. Both sides are guilty of violence, and if there's been excessive force by the police. The government agrees that that has to be investigated and those responsible must be convicted and punished. But that has to run through the judicial process. My objection to Michelle Bachelet's report, whom, by the way, I spent an hour with her assistant briefing her about my knowledge from interviewing people on the ground. I spoke with members of the National Assembly, of Fede Cámaras, of the churches, et cetera, and 35 non-governmental organizations. And I can assure you that there are many victims of right-wing terror who gave testimony to me, gave testimony to the High Commissioner, gave testimony to the team that the High Commissioner has there, and that is not reflected anywhere in the report.
Okay,
and
so let me ask Jose. Okay, so that's part of the, certainly, so that's part of the complaint and criticism. That on the other side of the fence, among the Guaido supporters and among those who are against Maduro, they've also done terrible things. Where's the UN to talk about that? Jose?
Well, look, let me start by saying that, you know, I understand in a country that the rule of law is respected, where the different branches of government are respected. Yes, investigations should run their course. But in a country where there is no rule of law, where we know that the Supreme Court is basically baseless, there's no law in the country and there's no control, this sort of investigations are a waste of time, and certainly they cannot be taken seriously. To your specific question, whether the report perhaps did not point out to the violence on the other side, but maybe by some of these opposition folks who have been protesting, I think that there's, you know, I think some of the folks in the government are missing the big picture, and it's this. It is the government, so the folks who have been in power, Maduro in this case, for many, many years, they are the ones who have the money, they are the ones who have the police, they are the ones who are responsible for anything that happens in this sort of protest. And the way that they have been handled this, I mean, this is not only the report, but we know that there's generals who have been inside Venezuela. They've been part of El Sebin, the spy agency in Venezuela, and they have confirmed they are now not with Maduro, and they have confirmed that they have used torture, they have used violations, human rights violations of any sort of size.
So let me take your point and pose it to Alfred, right? Alfred, we have to look at it in context. Do we have to hold Maduro's government to higher standards because they still control the police and they still control the army?
It's the government that has ratified the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It is the government that is bound by international human rights standards. But you cannot let the opposition off the hook. The same thing as you cannot let guerrillas off the hook. What my main point is, I received pertinent information from local NGOs, old NGOs, not gongos, not government NGOs. Funda Latin has been around decades before Chavez. And that information is very pertinent. I received information from the Grupo Sures. I received information from the Red Nacional de Derechos Humanos. All of that information was given also to Michelle Bachelet and to her team. And none of it is reflected, not even in a footnote.
Okay.
Not even my own report.
And that's a good point. And I'd love to get a response from the UN.
I wrote a report of 50 pages, and it's nowhere reflected in Michelle Bachelet's report.
We reached out to, yes, we reached out to Michelle Bachelet, we reached out to her team, we reached out to the UN, the Human Rights Commission. They declined to appear on this program. I want to shift this a little bit and talk about the political dynamics now in the issue of legitimacy in the country. Jose, we saw in February the opposition leader and the man you consider to be the legitimate leader of the country, basically appealing to the nation, appealing to the army to defect, appealing to the international community to help overthrow Maduro. That didn't happen. And now the polls are suggesting something interesting is going on the ground. A recent poll suggests the standoff in Venezuela has slowly shifted public support from Guaido to Maduro. Almost half the public backed the opposition leader back in February, but that changed in June with Maduro's numbers jumping to 41% and Guaido plummeting to 36%. That's from Dating Corp, which is a firm with links to the opposition. What's going on there, Jose? Did your preferred leader gamble by making that big push 5 months ago?
Look, I think what's happening in Venezuela, and I completely understand it, is that the Venezuelan people are growing impatient. They thought that this whole thing was going to be much faster. They certainly thought that when President Guaido and political leader Leopoldo Lopez appeared in La Carlota that morning of April 30th, they thought that this would be the end of the Maduro regime. So the Venezuelan people are frustrated. They are tired of the solution not coming to the table. I think certainly there was an expectation that the U.S. will get involved a little bit more than what they have to this very point. And I'm not saying that necessarily means an intervention, but it certainly means that they were gonna do a little bit more. I mean, you know, it's the government, both in Venezuela or this sort of operations, they take time. They take time.
You feel
President
do you
Guaido
feel let down by Trump,
Jose?
Do you feel let down by Trump?
I certainly do. And look, and coming from a Democrat who has supported President Trump when it comes to Venezuela openly, you know, I think he hasn't done enough. I think, yeah, the sanctions are great, and the economic sanctions, we've been doing those for a long time. But I think, look, I've always been open to all options. Should be on the table. I'm not saying a full unforced military intervention. I think that would bring a lot of blood to the country, and they never end well. But something's ought to be done where the United States and maybe some other countries from El Grupo de Lima get involved. Maybe some sort of, again, I don't think the intervention is the right word, but some sort of help, real help that comes into the country. Number one, and number two, we saw it with the medicine. We've been starting to push medicine and humanitarian aid through Cucuta and through Colombia, but that's got to be done at a much higher and a much faster pace.
Right.
But I am disappointed in President Trump that as he gets closer to the presidential election here back home, he's sort of been slowly pushing back or getting back when it comes to Venezuela.
Okay. Interesting to hear that from you. Alfred, the Norwegians and the Barbadians are hosting talks, proposed talks, trying to sort this out. Are you optimistic about that?
I am very much in favor of the talks, very much in favor of the Montevideo mechanism. This has been supported by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, and indeed, I think that the only solution can be a negotiated one. On the other hand, we have the bad experience that for 2 years, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero had negotiated in the Dominican Republic, and at the last minute, Julio Borges refused to sign when the document was already agreed. Now, that could happen again, that we reach an agreement, and then that Trump or Abrams or Bolton or Pompeo calls on Guaido and says, please don't sign because we're going to put you on the driver's seat anyway. Now, the problem with the loss of popularity of Guaido is simply that he is perceived by a percentage of the population of Venezuela as too much of a puppet of Washington. And that, of course, they don't need and they don't want. So what I'd like to see is the opposition to get its act together and to agree on a date for parliamentary elections and for presidential elections. I mean, these are provided for in the Constitution, and I would like to see that decided in the ballot box. But as I told the opposition when I was there, if you take power, don't forget, you're not only the president for the rich, you are the president for the 5, 6, 7, 8 million committed Chavistas who will not accept that the free education or free medical care and the social services will be cut. And that's what happened after the coup 2002, that the Carmona decree did away with 49 pieces of social legislation, did away with the Supreme Court, did away with the Chavez National Assembly. That we don't want to see, nor do we want to see civil war. So I hope that Barbados will deliver And there are many people who wish the negotiations to succeed, among them Sri Ravi Shankar, who has offered his mediation, as indeed the Pope.
Alfred and Jose, I hope to have you both back on the program sometime soon, but I've got to move on. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the International Criminal Court finds Bosco Ntaganda guilty of crimes against humanity. But how did the DRC warlord evade justice for so long? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.